From border security surges to local policy battles, this week's news really highlights a nation navigating some complex issues and, well, powerful decisions. You sent us a stack of sources showing these striking shifts in government policy and public debate, and this deep dive is all about cutting through the noise. We want to get to the core of what's truly happening across the country.
Indeed. And what's particularly insightful here, I think, is how things that seem separate, like a sudden pivot on border wall construction and legislative discussions way down in Texas, they actually connect. They tie into these larger conversations about national sovereignty, individual liberties, and, fiscal approaches. So we'll be exploring how these decisive actions are driving pretty significant changes and really shaping our collective future. Our mission today really is to pull out the most important insights from your news. We want to shed light on recent moves impacting everything from, say, national borders to local school boards. And we'll look at it through a lens that explores different interpretations of foundational American principles.
Okay, so one of the most striking developments this week, and this certainly grabbed my attention, was a really significant move on border security. The Biden administration just waived 26 federal laws, 26, to allow new border wall construction in South Texas. Now, this is a dramatic shift, right? Especially when you remember they previously stated a massive wall that spans the entire southern border is not a serious policy solution. So what does this reversal really tell us? We're talking about critical areas in the Rio Grande Valley. Local officials like County Judge Eloy Vera, they've highlighted concerns before about highly erosive lands, arroyos. Environmental advocates, too, have worried about habitats for endangered species like the ocelot. This construction could impact them. But interestingly, Customs and Border Protection confirmed these actions fulfill a mandate. Congress had already appropriated the funds back in fiscal year 2019 for this specific construction.
Yeah, that funding point is key. But the policy reversal itself, it offers this fascinating look into, well, the interplay between maybe ideological stances from the past and current pragmatic demands. I mean, on one hand, you've got the administration facing this dramatic surge in migrant encounters, thousands entering through places like Eagle Pass just last September alone. We've even heard Democratic mayors like El Paso's Oscar Eliezer openly say their cities have reached a breaking point.
A breaking point, wow.
Exactly. So that suggests that despite all the past criticisms, a physical barrier is now being viewed by some, perhaps reluctantly, as a necessary tool, an immediate tool to manage a crisis and, restore some sense of order. But then on the other hand, you have critics arguing this just highlights a lack of consistent long-term strategy, and that these temporary fixes, well, they can carry significant environmental and community costs.
That historical context is really important, isn't it? It does seem like the politics around border barriers have shifted, or maybe just reality forces these difficult choices sometimes.
Exactly. And, this isn't entirely new in terms of how administrations respond. We've seen these waivers before. The Bush administration, for example, used the Real ID Act back in 2005 to speed up border barrier construction. That impacted various environmental laws, but they installed over 580 miles of barriers by 2009. Then President Trump expanded on that, constructing 452 miles, often replacing older, sort of dilapidated barriers.
Right, replacing existing structures.
Yeah. So while the specifics now are notable, given this administration's prior stance, using waivers and the push to secure the border, that's been a consistent theme when presidencies face escalating challenges. I mean, the U.S.-Mexico border itself, it's huge, 1,954 miles. Busiest in the Western Hemisphere, something like 350 million crossings annually, and now patrolled by over 20,000 Border Patrol agents, the highest number ever. So this whole debate, it isn't just about politics shifting back and forth, it's about addressing very real, very immediate and complex challenges right there at our borders. It really makes you consider the trade-offs, between maybe long-held policy ideas and the immediate operational needs on the ground.
Okay, beyond the physical wall, we're also seeing what looks like a pretty aggressive push to tighten immigration enforcement more broadly. The Trump administration is meticulously reviewing, get this, over 55 million people who currently hold valid U.S. visas, looking for any violations that could lead to deportation. That's a massive proactive effort.
55 million. Wow, that's huge scale.
It really is. We're talking extensive reviews covering like the 12.8 million green card holders and 3.6 million temporary visa holders who were in the U.S. last year, and potentially millions more who hold multiple entry tourist visas but might be outside the country right now. The State Department is actively looking for indicators like overstaying visas, criminal activity, public safety threats, or providing support to terrorist groups. And we're already seeing direct impacts. There's this example of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a 30-year-old Salvadoran national, a construction worker in Maryland, recently detained by immigration authorities to face renewed deportation efforts. So what's the bigger picture here? What's the intended message of this continuous vetting?
Well, this initiative definitely signals a major strategic shift. It's towards more rigorous enforcement, continuous vetting. The sheer scale sends a powerful message, clearly prioritizing national security and the rule of law. There was a CNN report noting how these immigration crackdowns are reshaping America. It highlighted how fears of raids are causing really significant shifts in communities. Well, examples like parents feeling unsafe, businesses facing sudden acute labor shortages, like a Virginia grocery store reportedly losing its butchers, or down in Oregon, orchards with unpicked berries rotting because the labor just wasn't there. So it really raises this important question, doesn't it? How do you balance that rigorous enforcement with the broader economic and social stability of communities? Proponents will argue these actions are a robust commitment to national security, ensuring everyone complies with legal standards. That's the core argument. But critics point straight to the economic disruptions, the social anxieties. They argue a blanket approach might overlook the roles immigrants play, in the autonomy in society. And that kind of broad enforcement can undermine community trust, maybe lead to unintended consequences down the road.
Yeah, that definitely highlights the tension between those two goals, security through enforcement and economic or social stability. Okay, and speaking of economic impacts, let's turn to this proposed One Big Beautiful Bill Act, championed by the Trump administration. It includes $4.5 trillion in tax cuts. But these cuts are partly offset by pretty significant reductions elsewhere, like the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. That faces a proposed $187 billion cut. That's about 20% of its budget.
20%, yeah, that's substantial.
It is. And the administration also asserts its tariffs are generating massive amounts of saccage pouring into our Treasury's coffers. And they say it's primarily paid by foreign companies, not us, not American consumers. So what are the key points of this economic strategy? How might it affect, your American pocketbook?
Well, this approach really represents a clear commitment to reshaping the economy. Big tax reform, distinct trade policy. Proponents argue the tax cuts are designed to stimulate growth, encourage businesses to invest, create jobs, ultimately benefiting workers and consumers through a more robust economy. That's the theory. And the proposed stricter work requirements and reporting mandates for SNAP. They're framed as ways to limit program abuse by people capable of working, promoting fiscal responsibility, self-sufficiency. However, critics of the tax cuts often raise concerns about the national debt, for one, and whether the benefits really get distributed broadly across all income levels.
Right, who really benefits?
Exactly, and similarly with the tariffs. While the administration positions them as leverage, for national benefit, protecting American industries, many economists argue that the costs often get passed to domestic consumers through higher prices on imports, not fully absorbed by foreign companies.
That's a crucial distinction, understanding that real-world impact. So the administration champions it as fiscally responsible, a boost for American interests. But some economists worry about debt from the tax cuts and whether tariffs actually work the way they're described.
Precisely. It's a debate, really, between the intended goals stimulating the economy, government efficiency, versus potential impacts on public services, consumer prices, the national debt, and how effective these policies are. Well, it often depends on your economic perspective, your priorities.
Okay, so while we've seen these big federal shifts, it's often at the state level, isn't it, where some of the boldest policy experiments happen. Let's pivot now to Texas. It continues to be, a real hotbed for conservative legislative action. Specifically, lawmakers there are pushing a bold agenda, especially around electoral maps. The Texas House just approved a new congressional map, and its proponents say it's specifically designed to flip 5 seats to Republicans in Washington, a plan directly supported by former President Trump. How might this actually impact the balance of power?
Well, this redistricting effort, it's a classic example, isn't it? How state-level political strategy has direct national implications. This particular mapping, it sparked huge political battles. Remember the 2-week walkout by Democratic lawmakers? From the proponents' view, it's a strategic measure designed to ensure Republican representation, maintain a majority in Congress, reflecting what they see as the electoral will of conservative voters in Texas. But critics, of course, argue that this kind of partisan redistricting, often called gerrymandering, can effectively disenfranchise voters. It can lead to less representative government by creating these districts that heavily favor one party, basically choosing the voters instead of the other way around.
Yeah, choosing the voters. That's a common critique.
It is. And interestingly, California is reportedly already responding with its own redistricting plans, trying to counter Texas's moves. It highlights that sort of tit-for-tat nature we see in politics.
Okay, so beyond the political maps, what other significant conservative policies are taking root down there in Texas?
Well, we see several key initiatives that could directly impact your finances. For example, the Texas House passed bills designed to lower property taxes. They did this by reducing the voter approval tax rate. That's the rate increase that triggers an election from 3.5% down to 2.5% for larger cities and counties. It's a concrete step, intended to put more money back in your wallet, right? Controlling government spending, easing tax burdens. Now, some, like State Representative Mitch Little, questioned if it would provide meaningful enough tax relief for homeowners, but it's definitely an effort to address a major concern for many Texans.
Okay, meaningful enough relief. That's an interesting qualifier.
It is. And critics on the other side often argue that deep property tax cuts can strain local budgets, potentially leading to reductions in essential services, schools, public safety, infrastructure, or maybe shifting the burden somewhere else.
Right, and it's not just about economics, is it? Texas is also really at the forefront of some intense cultural policy debates. Attorney General Ken Paxton, for instance. He's issued instructions for public schools, the ones not specifically blocked by courts yet, to display the Ten Commandments in classrooms. This is in line with the new state law. His argument is they're integral to the United States' moral and legal heritage, foundational to the nation. What's the context here, legally and historically?
Well, this action by Paxton immediately throws us back into that long-standing debate about the separation of church and state, a core principle, right, from the First Amendment. Historically, the Supreme Court has ruled against mandatory displays like this in public schools. They cite concerns about government endorsing religion. There's the 1980 case, Stone v. Graham. The court found a Kentucky law requiring the Ten Commandments display violated the Establishment Clause. So while Paxton is arguing for their historical significance in early American law, a federal judge has already put a temporary block on this specific mandate in 11 school districts, citing those First Amendment concerns.
Okay, so it's already in court.
Oh yeah, Paxton swiftly appealed. So this is going to continue to be a significant legal battle. You have legal scholars actively debating the nuances historical influence versus state-mandated religious display. It's a complex one.
It sounds like it. Now, moving from religious displays, there's another significant cultural policy in Texas, Senate Bill 12. It took effect September 1st, and it bans student clubs based on sexual orientation or gender identity. How are people viewing this particular measure, proponents and critics?
Yeah, SB 12 is a really clear example of state-level policy tackling concerns about certain social ideologies in education. Supporters like State Board of Education trustee Julie Pickren, they argue pretty unequivocally that this measure empowers parents and it eliminates diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and policies. They emphasize that time spent on what they call woke DEI indoctrination is a minute that we are not teaching a child how to read or how to do math. So the argument centers on core academics, parental rights, over what they see as divisive programs.
Okay, focusing on core academics.
That's the stated goal. But it has definitely raised serious concerns from students. We heard about a 12-year-old, Minerva James, name change for privacy, expressing a feeling of profound loss of support for LGBTQ plus students in conservative districts. Critics argued these measures create hostile environments for LGBTQ plus students. They limit their ability to find support, find community, potentially contributing to mental health challenges, and diminishing overall inclusivity in schools.
Okay, finally, one more striking development out of Texas. Attorney General Ken Paxton again. He's launched an investigation into utility companies linked to last year's devastating wildfires, Smokehouse Creek and Windy Deuce. What's the focus of this investigation? And what does it suggest about public safety and corporate responsibility?
This investigation really zooms in on corporate priorities and their potential impact on public safety. It's quite pointed. Attorney General Paxton explicitly stated he suspects these companies possibly prioritized environmental, social, and governance, ESG, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, agendas over safety and necessary maintenance. Now, just to clarify for listeners, ESG generally refers to corporate efforts on environmental sustainability, social responsibility, good governance. DEI aims for diverse, equitable, inclusive workplaces. Broad terms, very widely in practice.
ESG and DEI.
Exactly. Paxton's investigation follows reports indicating utility facilities, specifically a broken pole from Xcel Energy, were involved in igniting the Smokehouse Creek fire. That fire scorched over 1 million acres. Massive damage. So this investigation is being framed by the Attorney General as a crucial step. holding corporations accountable for, as he puts it, prioritizing certain social or environmental initiatives over core responsibilities, like public safety, critical infrastructure maintenance. It reflects a broader critique of these practices, raising questions about how companies really balance these different, sometimes competing objectives.
So, okay, wrapping all this up.
Right.
What does it all mean? From the U.S. border to the classrooms of Texas, we're clearly seeing a period marked by pretty assertive policy shifts. Across national security, fiscal approaches, cultural priorities, these aren't just headlines, are they? They feel like powerful reflections of some deeply held values that are actively shaping the nation's direction, prompting some critical public discussions.
Indeed. Yeah, this deep dive really reveals a period where various foundational principles are being, well, reasserted, reevaluated through specific policy, specific legal actions, whether it's that renewed focus on border enforcement, or the drive for lower taxes and economic reform, or the strong pushback against certain educational and corporate ideologies. These actions underscore concerted efforts to implement distinct visions for the country. The data, the legislative efforts, the direct executive actions, they all point to this complex interplay between pragmatic responses to maybe immediate crises and deliberate attempts to solidify long-held beliefs into law and policy.
So as you, our listener, observe these pretty significant shifts, maybe consider this. Are these decisive actions effectively strengthening our nation's foundations, paving the way for greater stability, prosperity? Or are they maybe introducing new complexities, unintended consequences we haven't fully anticipated yet? How do these changes impact your community, your family directly, and what future do they truly build?
It's a crucial question, isn't it? Because the answer is, well, they'll shape both our immediate experience and the trajectory of the country for years to come.
Keep informed, keep questioning, and keep an eye on how these foundational principles continue to shape our world. We really appreciate you joining us for this deep dive.